That
Deb,
way
are you
people will be
starting
able
or
to
am I?
access it.
Thank
Real
you,
quick.
ladies and gentlemen. All
Deb.
right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Deborah Hoffman, Director of Economic Development for Passaic County, co-host of this exciting webinar, Cybersecurity Basics and Best Practices for Small Business, How to Protect Your Company. A very important topic and we have fabulous speakers today. I would like to first, though, introduce Kate Muldoon, the Director of the William Patterson University Small Business Development Center, who's a co-host with us today. Kate, you want to give a few words?
Thanks, Deb. This is take two from me, right?
All right.
So I'm Kate Muldoon. I'm the Director of the Small Business Development Center at William Patterson University. Our mission is to help people start businesses and help existing entrepreneurs grow their businesses. There are 12 centers in the state. Our center covers Passaic County. We have one-on-one counseling, we do training, we have workshops, we have some of our clients work with MBA students at the university, and it's a great resource for businesses who really need some assistance. It could be hand-holding, trying to help them get their financials together for a loan. So we really try to cater what the needs are of the business. We're also trying to think outside the box and offer programming that is a little bit different. As a result of the CARES Act, we were able to put together a supply chain management class that I just hung up from. I mean, this is critical right now, but it's not your typical how-to, but it's filling people in on information that they need. So cyber has always been one of the programs. In fact, I think this is the 6th cyber conference workshop that we've had. So we know that this is critical for the small business community to get this kind of information in their hands. So welcome, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the speakers.
Thank you so much, Kate. And please do visit the Small Business Development Center. They have a really tremendous asset to the business community. Great consultants for free. Services are free. Don't pass it up. Okay. Now it's my honor. It's our next speaker to provide a welcome is County Commissioner John Bartlett. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Deborah. And to everyone who's joined us, welcome to our webinar on cybersecurity basics and best practices for small businesses, how to protect your company. I want to applaud Deborah Hoffman and her team in our Passaic County Economic Development Division for putting this together and putting it together in particular such a timely program for all of us right now in partnership with Kate and her team in William Patterson. I know that for me as a lawyer and for professionals in most fields, the past 2 years have seen a huge increase in our use of computers and electronic communications. As an attorney, that means needing to be sure that my online conversations are secure, because when I'm talking with clients, those communications are privileged. And when I'm planning for a trial or negotiating a settlement, those communications are at least highly confidential. Likewise, for physicians, the need to comply with Hipaa in the context of telehealth is a new challenge. The same goes across numerous professions. And for all of us, just the issue of the security of our network and of our computers and of our own business information and data, which is so confidential and important to our competitive advantage. Against that backdrop, a recent article in Insurance Business America offers some cautionary data. According to analysis by Barracuda, ransomware events that occurred between August 2020 and July 2021 showed a 64% increase in attacks year over year. 44% of the attacks over the last 12 months targeted U.S. organizations, with an average ransom ask per incident of over $10 million. It's obvious that cyber attacks have significantly increased the cost of doing business and the risk of doing business online. And data like these underscore the need for companies to implement special safeguards for their staff, for their data systems, and potentially consider cybersecurity insurance to cover potential losses. Our experts joining us today will address the challenges facing our business community from cyber threats and how to ensure that your company can avoid cyber disaster. I appreciate their taking time out of their busy schedules, and I'm glad all of you have joined us to benefit from their wisdom. Thank you all very much for attending this afternoon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you so much for setting the scene. That was perfect. I do want to announce to our attendees, if you have a question during the program, please put it in the chat room. We'll be monitoring that and we'll read it out to our participants, the panelists, and they'll answer your questions. But thank you all very much. And we are recording, just to let you know. So we are recording this and it will be available to you. I'd like to proceed now with our first speaker. Micah Hassinger, he's Operation Manager from Aton Computing, and he's going to address techniques to ensure your company is protected from cyber security threats. Micah, thank you so much for joining us today. I believe you have some PowerPoint that we'll share with you now.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Deborah. And it is a privilege to be invited to this meeting. Thank you for including us with our ongoing relationship with the county. We do appreciate the opportunity to help the small business community here in the county. So I do have a few slides to share with everyone. I like keeping slide decks minimal, and I don't like reading slides. So here we go. So there are many challenges today that small and medium businesses face when it comes to cybersecurity. As the commissioner pointed out, just in the last year, to see a 64% increase in anything is something that's important for all of us to be aware of, for all of us to know about, and for all of us to know how we can best address these problems. And if we think about some of the other numbers that he mentioned, the average ransom being over $10 million, many of our small businesses, that's just inachievable. That's a showstopper. And as our small business owners here in the county know, one of their most precious resource that they have is information, right? Some of us carry personal information for our customers, things like that we can't afford to lose, but we also definitely can't afford to get out to the public, because we are it's something that we're entrusted to keep secure. So some of the challenges, again, that small and medium businesses face today is instant response plans. Knowing the potential things that can happen to our businesses and making sure we know steps that we can take in order to alleviate these problems, in order to maximize the resources that we have as small businesses and small business owners, and in order to intercept these things, to stop them from spreading, to stop them from going everywhere, and these valuable resources getting exposed to the public. Disaster recovery plans, also very important for what happens if data gets encrypted that we have on our network, and we cannot get that data back. To be able to recover from backup, very important, but also to make sure that our backup solution isn't also affected by any ransomware that comes in. There's a lot of things that we can do as business owners, as IT professionals as well, to make sure that that data is safe, that our valuable data is very safe. Now, both of these things, these instant response plans and these disaster recovery plans, need to be adopted by the decision makers within the company, because just having these plans in place is great, but if we don't abide by these plans, when something happens, we can't benefit from having those plans. So we need to make sure that our decision makers know about them and that they are in full agreement, knowing what the responsibility that they have is, knowing the potential of loss that they carry as a result of problems that we see hitting people today. And then one point that we put on this slide is something that we don't see often in business: tabletop exercise. Now, I've been working in government for over 20 years now, and tabletop exercises are something that's huge in offices of emergency management throughout the country, right? If a hurricane was to hit Passaic County, they stage these things. They make sure that they know how they're going to respond, so that when this event takes place, it's not a surprise. They're not concerned about who does what, where, and when. They know what's happened because they've practiced these things and are sure they know how best to respond. So what can we all do about these issues that are presented? Well, we have it outlined here: policies, protocols, and plans. the 3 Ps, very important in cybersecurity, in cybersecurity response. Knowing these things, having them in writing, and making sure that they are regularly updated, because the cyber landscape is one that changes on an hourly basis. Some of our other professionals we have on this call will be able to speak to that. Ransomware from a year ago is different than ransomware that we see happening today. It's spread in different ways, and it does different things. End user security awareness training, also very important to make sure that our users, when they see an email come across that is very clearly something that is malicious, something that is trying to use them as a tool to get into that very precious information, we need to make sure that they know about these things, about how this happens, and about who to report them to inside the organization should this happen, so that we can't always rely on every employee in the organization to be the most well-trained individual in the organization. But what we can rely on is being able to block these things once we're made aware of them, so that it doesn't spread throughout the organization. Having partnerships with support organizations is also very important today, to be able to count on professionals who we can bring in to help alleviate these problems, experts who deal with these things on a daily basis. Because small business owners, if you deal with these things once a year, that's a lot. But there are professionals out there who do this on a daily basis for people, who know best policies and procedures that can be executed at times like this. And then being able to do that posture review and assessment. Very important when we keep in mind those tabletop exercises that we talk about, when we identify flaws in our plans, when we identify holes in the armor, we need to be able to patch those holes. We need to be able to patch those holes and then do what we can to detect more holes in the armor of our organization. Now, again, working with government for many years, tactical planning. In dealing with law enforcement for as long as we have been, they plan for events. They plan for things, ransom type events. Well, we can do the same when we're planning for ransomware type events. We can be strategic in our tactical planning, making sure that we know what to do, making sure that all staff members who are assigned to respond to these things know what will be expected of them at those times, to make sure that those staff members stay on board when this ransomware hits. Because I've spoke to many people, and this gets to our next point, that when ransomware, they get hit with a large ransomware attack, it's a mass exodus. IT staff runs out the door. That's no good. We can't have that. And by best training our staff and investing in our staff, we can make sure that doesn't happen at these critical moments. And again, we have partnerships listed, also very important. And then something that we talked about in our last slide, and we're going to talk about here, obtaining buy-in from Oversight. Now, it's good to see people on this call today, because that means that you've identified that the data on your network is very important, is the cherished inside of that bagel, nice and soft and easy to get to. But we go back to our tactical planning and our being strategic, making sure that that bagel is stale on the outside and hard to get into. Very important that our oversight in the company knows how important that is, knows what's at risk if this data is exposed. And some of the tools that we've made use of in the past, I'm going to kill my screen share if that's all right. You're all stuck looking at me, I'm sorry. But some of the tools that we've used in the past for these type things, making sure our antivirus solution is up to date, is supported, is the latest version possible, so that that can track these issues best. There's things, intrusion prevention systems that can be installed on the network that detect every packet that enters and leaves the network and analyzes it to see if this is in fact something that is a danger to our employees and to our data that we hold on our network. Also, making sure that today when we have something, remote access became very important over the last 18 months. Making sure our remote points of access are secured, making sure that people can't use those remote points of access, them being trusted to get into this, get into our very valuable information, it's also very important. So that's where our training comes into play of our employees. That's where it's not easy. employees need to know that, yes, you're going to be asked to reset your password every 30 days, every 90 days, whatever the policy is that you come up with. Yes, we're going to put things in place like multi-factor authentication, because that's what we need to do to keep this information secure and to keep the lights on in the building. It's so important for business owners to understand and to make that point so clear to the folks that they work with. And that's all for my slides today. That's all for my presentation. If anyone has any questions, as Deborah pointed out, feel free to either raise your hand as an attendee or post it in the chat, and I will do everything I can to answer appropriately. Thank you all again for inviting me to this meeting today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think you set the scene perfectly. People do have to plan ahead. Kate Muldoon and I are always talking about disaster planning, and this is certainly a big part of it. And of course, now we just had a flood, and hopefully some people did, they did have a disaster plan in place when they were impacted. Our next, thank you so much, Micah, really. Our next speaker is Eric Rosenberg. He's the Chief Information Officer for William Patterson University, and he's going to be addressing external cyber threats and protection. Kristen Holton of our staff will be sharing his slide deck right now. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you. While Kristen's preparing the slide deck, my name is Eric Rosenberg. I am the Chief Information Officer at William Patterson University. I've been at the university now for 10 years, almost 10 years in this capacity. I have a staff of a little over 60 employees, and my responsibilities include cybersecurity, systems administration, the network, as well as desktop computing and the classroom environment. Next slide, please. As was discussed, the threat environment is increasing. So organized crime now is definitely behind some of the attacks. It's no longer someone sitting in their basement trying to break into a corporation or to individuals. It's now highly organized. The vulnerability is almost immediately. So once they've gained access, they immediately will take control of your systems, your data, and so forth. It's not, usually with organized groups, it's not that they leave something sleeping there, that they're going to look at this information over time and so forth. So you have to be ready, you have to stop an attack, and immediately. You can't sit back and say, oh, we're going to investigate or see how we're going to manage that attack. The majority of the break-ins, as was discussed, is human through the human nexus. The compromise of entry is very often during through an email message where you click on something, you expose your credentials, or you end up in a shadow nefarious website and someone steals your credentials. And I'll be talking a little bit about how one can present themselves from that from happening. There's also what's called distributed denial of service attacks, and that's where someone really kind of attempts to almost bring down your network or your systems or create a distraction. So while you're focused on that, they may try to hack you at, from another way. So you're focused on bringing down that denial of service attack, and they're actually working on hacking your desktops at that point. Next slide, please. Risk. Ransomware, certainly for small business and individuals, is the most likely attack, and it's rising. They don't just go after large corporations, they'll go after an individual, and they'll, the means of them transferring money and obtaining money with Bitcoins is so much easier in the past. So it's very easy for them to hold you for ransom and collect a payment in a way that's virtually non-traceable. Data loss, of course, is always a problem. You could be losing personal identifiable information, your intellectual property, and also your customer database. depending on, if who you are. For example, the Chinese are very much interested in the Chinese government or customers and so forth, so they can, take away, your potential customers lowballing you, and they can also find that information on your pricing and so forth. So data loss is still a problem, but that's usually for larger corporations. Smaller businesses, it's more likely you're facing ransomware. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned, it's essential to keep your operating systems upgraded. There's sometimes a cost for that. There's sometimes in order to upgrade an operating system, you have to upgrade hardware. That's an expensive doing business that you have to do. For example, if you're in a Windows environment, as many businesses are, Windows 7 is not up to date. You really need to be at Windows 7 at this point. The other thing you need to do is your virus protection or endpoint protection needs to be up to date. It needs to auto update. You don't want to depend on updating weekly. Sometime a threat's discovered on a Monday. You don't want to have to wait till your auto update on Friday to discuss and a scheduled update on Friday to be protected. You want your updating to happen constantly. And also, if you when you get an update, often a reboot is required, and people are always reluctant to do it. Don't relay that reboot. That reboot is so important to make sure the newest software is basically active in your environment. Just having it on your computer isn't satisfactory if you don't reboot and it's not running. Network security settings. It's important to take a look at your router and your Wi-Fi and make sure you have the securest settings on them. Most vendors have recommended settings for security, and I recommend, unless it's a compelling reason, follow the most secure settings that they recommend. The other thing you could do is, and I think this is really important, the average user does not need to be logged into administrative accounts. You can operate as a user. So when you're operating as a user, there's less chance of your underlying operating system being attacked. So I strongly encourage everyone to make sure that they set up a non-privileged account to use and log into that account, and only use the privileged account when adding new software and updates. And a lot of software will actually do updates without even being logged into the administrative account. So it's rare that you would need to use an administrative account. And certainly if you're managing a number of machines in your organizations, certainly there's no reason for most users in your organization to have those administrative privileges. I think multi-factor authentication, often referred to as two-factor authentication, is essential. Depending on passwords, just does not work in this day and age. There's too much of a risk of being compromised. And even if you change your passwords regularly, if you change them every 30 days, there's nothing to say the day after you change them that they will not be compromised. And very often people don't do very extensive changes to their passwords. They just change a number at the end or a letter at the end. So they're very often easily guessed. So wherever you can, turn on multi-factor authentication, dual authentication. Most banks, in fact, I think all banks now offer that. You certainly can do that with email systems and so forth. It's an extra step. You often have to get a PIN sent to you through a text message, but it's far better to do that than take the risk. And very often when you do multi-factor authentication, you can register a device, so you don't have to do that multi-factor every time you log in. Unique passwords. Don't use the same password on all your systems, especially, for example, your credit card, your banking, and so forth. All of those should be unique. They should not follow a pattern that anybody can guess. There's software available where you can manage your passwords that are secure. You might want to look into that, but certainly you don't want to use the same password or the same password with a letter or something very common on all your accounts. This way, if somebody should get into your email, they're not necessarily getting into your banking. alert settings. I think those are very important. In your email, in your banking, your credit card, you can get alerts on whether or not there's a credit card posting, whether there's a change of address. That's very often one of the things that happens with hackers in credit cards and so forth. They'll go in, they'll change your address, and then they'll request a new card be mailed. So you want to get alert settings if anything's changed in your profile, your email addresses are changed, and so forth. Usually those alerts could be your email account or text message. So I highly recommend setting alerts. One of the things you could do in an environment where you have cloud-hosted email, for example, through Microsoft 365 and so forth, is you could set various security settings, which says you can do things like safe links, where the link in the email message is actually re-encoded to go through Microsoft. So, for example, if a website is determined to be a nefarious site, that website could be stopped at Microsoft level, so you will not pass through it either on your phone or another device if you're not in your office reading email and so forth. They'll also, if you implement safe links, if they know there's a nefarious link in an email message, they can either remove it or they can quarantine that email message. And the other thing you want to do is you want to encrypt your data on your devices. So, example, if you have a laptop, there's various ways you can have your data encrypted on your laptop. So, should your laptop get lost or stolen, someone does not have access to the data on your laptop. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, you can enter it into the comment field, or if you want, feel free to email me. My address is there, as well as my departmental website if you want to learn more about the IT environment at William Patterson.
Thank you so much, Eric. I've learned everything I'm doing wrong. It's very impressive. I started to take a lot of notes, start to change all my passwords. Thank you very, very much.
Deb, can we take a question now, or you want to wait till the end?
Sure, we can take a question. Let's look in the chat. There's a question.
No, I have a question for Eric.
Okay, go ahead.
Eric, you were talking about the passwords and having one of those like apps that you could put all the different passwords in.
Right.
Suppose that's broken into.
I know.
Having the same one for all my sites.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, on the password programs, you definitely want to have multi-factor authentication on one of those password programs. And you definitely want to have a very strong password on that one. And correct, if somebody does get into that, they could get all your passwords. So one has to think about it. Now, for example, I don't have in that my password storage, I don't store my bank's password or any of my credit card passwords in there. Those I commit to memory, or my retirement plan. So I keep those passwords in my head.
Oh my.
The same ones.
Well, I've heard that a very strong password is like a phrase. So if you know like a phrase from a song, that's a favorite song, and that's not difficult to remember. And then if you have some special characters you throw on your
Yeah, and it's always good to put the special characters not on the end, because that's where people think about them. Put the special characters somewhere in the middle. It's good if you're going to, capitalization of a letter is important, but not a letter you would expect to see capitalized, not the first letter or the first, if it's a phrase, the first letter of each phrase, but capitalize a weird letter in there. So for example, in my passwords, I might, for example, capitalize one particular letter every time I use that letter.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
That's great. Thanks, Eric.
I'm sorry, Kate, I missed you. I spoke over you.
I said thank you, Eric.
Oh, you're welcome.
Never mind. Okay. Yes, thank you so much. That was fantastic. All right, so we're now very honored. We're going to have a tag team presentation. We have Rick Bortnick, is an attorney with Wilson, Elsner, Moskowitz,
Yeah.
Edelman, and Dicker, and
Like 10 minutes.
Shiraz Saeed.
Because I didn't notice until now and when I first came. All right, cool.
It's okay, and they're going
Thank
to
you, man.
discuss the brave new world of privacy
doing
and
well.
cybersecurity and cyber insurance. Really an important topic. A lot of people probably don't know about it. How do I get it? How much does this cost? Is this only for very big companies? Can my small company, profit? So thank you both, Rick and Shiraz. I very much appreciate you coming in. Shiraz left. He's left the office. Okay, here he is.
All right, well, Deb, thank you.
Sorry, just one more in the office.
Okay,
Apologize.
yeah, I understand totally. Okay, take it away, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you, Deb, and I want to thank Micah because I wouldn't be here if not for him. He had engaged me to assist him with the insurance acquisition for the county, and we've taken it further. And I will say, unprompted, he was one of the most proactive IT folks that I've ever worked with, to the point where I thought he was a risk manager more than an IT person. So I am an attorney with Wilson Elser. I've been doing this for 17 years. And I work with Shiraz, who is an underwriter at Arch. And Shiraz, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure, Shiraz Saeed. I'm the practice leader for cyber risk at Arch Insurance Group. Prior to that, I was with CV Star & Co. as their practice leader for cyber risk. And then prior to that, I was with AIG. That's where I sort of came up and started as an underwriter and worked my way up within the pillar of cyber. So same, like Rick was saying, sort of from that risk management perspective is sort of where we're coming from it.
And you just said you worked for Hank Greenberg at two different companies.
Correct.
Which I'm not sure if that's a feather in your cap or a feather in your cap. So,
well, as many people have said to me, is you must be very mentally resilient to work at these places and move up and all that kind of stuff and have some success. So I guess that's one thing I am, Rick, mentally resilient.
And you've still got your hair after all.
And I still got my hair, baby.
All right, Kate, can we start the slides? Or I'm sorry, who's got the slides?
Kristen will start your slides.
Kristen.
No worries.
Yeah, I got Kristen. All right. Well, we unlike the other two speakers, I think I have 47 slides, which will pour through. I've written several treatises and book chapters on stuff, and so I'm a teacher, if anything else, and a lawyer. So I'm going to blow through this, and Shiraz is going to blow through his, and let's see where we go. So, and next slide. So there's the agenda. I can tell you, Shiraz and I did one of these for 6 hours. So you're really going to see the Cliff Notes version. You're not going to see the Cliff Notes. You're going to see the Cliff version. So next slide. So the big issue that is the elephant in the room are laws, regulations and laws. New Jersey does not yet have one, but they've been talking about it for 2 years now or so. It's inevitable. The California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, is the state-of-the-art law, so I'm going to focus on that because it's the most mature. There's a new law that's starting in California a year from now, 1/1/23. But as you see here, Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut already have followed California. Illinois has biometric law, which is unique to the state of Illinois. New York has a CCPA, I'd say light, which is more of a breach response notification law than a privacy law. When I say privacy law, I mean if you hold data, personal information, credit card information, health information, then you have all kinds of duties and obligations in advance of an incident. and you may not be compliant, and nobody may figure out you are compliant unless there's a breach. And if there is an incident, then you could be in trouble with the regulators. Next slide. So here, this is California. So this is the template, I would say, for what's going to happen in New Jersey. And I think it's going to be relatively soon. The president yesterday, as many of you may know, brought up cybersecurity at the UN. And I can tell you the federal government is making it a priority. And it needs to be a priority for all the reasons we've been talking about. And it's been being enforced. The Full Employment for Lawyers Act in California begins with the Office of Attorney General, who is hiring people to investigate and enforce violations of the law. And again, New Jersey's going to be right there. So not to be a nervous Nelly or to burn it down, but if I was going to be doing business in any state in the country, including New Jersey, I do my best to get my compliance up. And the reason I say that is, I'll give you a hypothetical. If you're going to rob a bank, are you going to rob the bank in the middle of Manhattan? Are you going to go up into Passaic and rob a corner bank in Passaic? Obviously, you're going to go to Passaic because it's the lowest hanging fruit. And their security is, I'm sure, much more lax than what would be on Wall Street or on Fifth Avenue. And that's the same with businesses. If you're a small business, you probably don't have security or very good security for your business. And so at the touch of a button, for example, if they have infiltrated your network, which they probably have already and nobody knows about it, then they could steal all kinds of information and data from 10 million companies at one time at the push of a button. So just because you're a small or medium-sized business, I think you're more of a target. Higher education is a very big target, huge target. Municipalities, and I know that Micah can testify to this. He's heard what's going on. And so every person attending and every person listening should be very, very mindful and vigilant about what is going on and what they need to do to protect themselves, not only from threat actors, but from lawsuits and regulators, because California and many other states have private rights of action. So somebody can sue you if you are breached and their data is affected. That is the battleground in many states. Are they going to allow a private consumer to sue under the act? Certain states have said yes, certain states have said no. I think that's one of the issues that New Jersey is debating. But at the end of the day, whether you are subject to a class action or you'll at least be subject to some type of enforcement investigation and action. Next. And here's an example of what the criteria is for in California for being subject to the regulation. Next. I'm going to blow through these. And this is the type of information that is covered. Bank account information, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, things that are unique to you that can identify you, distinguish a natural person from someone else. This doesn't apply to businesses. The business can't prosecute or claim violations under the law. Only natural persons can. But typically, you probably are holding personal credit cards, not corporate credit cards, corporate EIN numbers, for example. You have social security numbers if you hold any such information. Next. And there's enforcement, 2,500 to 7,500 by the Attorney General, and then the private right of action, $100 if it's accidental, $750 if you consciously aren't doing what you need to be doing, and multiply that. How many people's data do you have? If you have 1,000 people's data, then it's 750 times 1,000. if you screw up. If it's 1 million, the numbers just roll up. So you really need to be sensitive to the two different loss exposures. Next. This is just enforcement. Next. This is the New York law that if you do business in New York, you need to be sensitive to. Next. Next. Financial services company are regulated by the New York Division of Financial Services. They have their own rules, which are pretty robust. They're pretty close to what California is. So if you are a financial institution, you're looking over your shoulder at NYDSF. Next. And then we have other states. Go ahead. I'm not going to run through the various states. I'm not sure people do business there. Next. Next. Hipaa. I don't need to get into Hipaa. If you have health information and you are a regulated entity, you're subject to Hipaa, and the Department of Health and Human Services is going to be coming after you. They're very, very vigilant, and they're very difficult to deal with. I doubt any of you qualify to be regulated under Hipaa, but I don't know enough about the participants to be able to say yes or no, but you at least should be aware of Hipaa. And Hipaa does not prevent you from having to say whether or not you've been vaccinated. That is an urban myth. Hipaa only applies to healthcare providers. So if someone asks you, are you vaccinated? The answer is not Hipaa, because Hipaa doesn't apply to you personally being asked that question. But it's a good excuse, I guess. Next. Next. The EU has probably the toughest laws in the country. I doubt anyone here deals with Europe or sends information to Europe. If you do, contact me and we can talk about it. Next. And then Illinois' biometrics, fingerprints, eye scans, things like that. There's hundreds of suits in Illinois for biometrics, and they more and more every day. So if you did business in Illinois, that's a different vertical that you need to be very sensitive to. They're being prosecuted at record numbers by plaintiffs, not by regulators. Next. So what are the vectors? What are the threats that we have? We've talked about, or the others have talked about this, employees are your biggest risk, and they do need to be trained. That's what I do. That's what others do, is train employees what to do, what not to do. I've got some slides on things like that. Hacking, we know what that is. Vendor portals, if your infrastructure network is open to vendors, then they are as much of a threat to your system, your network, as anyone. You want to really limit who can get access to your portals. As Mike has said, you really, really, really need to limit who has administrative credentials. Ransomware, we've already talked about business email compromise, phishing, whaling, phishing, smishing. Phishing is sending an email to somebody and trying to get them to open a link or try to go to a website or doing something. Whaling is targeted. Phishing is doing it through electronics. Smishing is through the chat feature on our phone. Message is, and deepfakes are doing videos of people doing things that they didn't really do. Like there was one 2 years ago with Nancy Pelosi. They made her look drunk, stumbling on the dais. It wasn't real, but it looks real. It looks as real as it could be. And that's called deepfakes. Next. So do you want to do this one, Strauss?
Sure, Rick, no problem. All right.
This is your slide, so I figured you'd like to do it.
Yeah, it must be, yeah. So basically what we're looking at here is, or what I'm going to give you some feedback on, is really what claims data we're seeing from the carrier side. So typically when we see either a ransomware or a business email compromise, those are the two most common types of incidents. So for those on the call that aren't familiar with ransomware, that's somebody holding your network hostage after they take over the whole thing. And business email compromise is what, Rick and the others were talking about, using phishing emails or other scams to try to get you to wire transfer money or move money. So typically what we're seeing is the employee is the number one driver of losses. In particularly, it's the second bullet point, negligent. That is the employee that makes a mistake rather than an employee who's doing it on purpose. So that could be like somebody clicking on a link they're not supposed to, going to a website they're not supposed to, or losing their laptop, something like that. The other group that's also you could consider external, but I believe are really internal, are your vendors. These are any organizations that basically either interact with your company's private information, meaning your employees or your customers, or any outside third party that interacts with your computer system. So it could be one or the other or both. So for example, a cloud provider would be someone that has access to your private information and your computer system. There's also like a debt collector. So if you're in the business of like a, doctor's office or whatever, and you have to collect debts, those debt collectors would take the private information from the hospital or the medical office and then subsequently go do their job. So they have access to customer information of their clients. So these vendors, though they are on the outside, they're actually inside because you gave them the keys to come inside and you trust and rely upon them. And the groups below, the hackers, the organized criminals, or the nation states, they're going to try to leverage or take advantage of those vendors or those negligent employees in order to inflict their will. You could sit through a lot of presentations where they try to lay out their motivation into multiple different categories, but I break them down into basically two. They're doing it for an ideological and or a financial gain. What does that mean? Ideological to me means we're making a point or we're teaching you a lesson, versus financial where we're trying to make money off of you. So a big example of this would be, if you guys recall, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a online dating application in which you were allowed to mask your identity or be anonymous per se within the confines of the app. This was part of their shtick, which was trying to promote people cheating on their spouses. So you need that certain level of anonymity. Long story short, they had promised their clients that they would delete their profiles in entirety if they paid them an extra $20 or so fee. If you read the letter of demand from the hackers that ultimately hacked this dating site, it'll say that you actually are not deleting those profiles in their entirety. They are actually still visible and available, and basically you're cheating us. And as such, don't pay us millions of dollars, but subsequently take your site offline and can stop conducting business. So go out of business.
Shiraz, was that Ashley Madison?
Yeah, sure. You used it by its name. This is being recorded, so I opted not to use the name of the company. But yeah,
Well,
sure.
I worked on the incident, so I am not a member or constituent. I am simply a fixer upper. I'm the fixer. Let's call that.
Well, then you know what I'm saying is most likely correct, and that's it. They didn't say give us millions of dollars. They said shut down. And this ideological threat is equally as dangerous as the financial threat, but the financial threat to me is not very much, it's not really targeted. It's more of a, what I would say, a spray or a large scale attack where they're basically just finding people that have weak, low hanging fruit and taking advantage of it. If you guys are familiar or not familiar, there is a concept referred to as ransomware as a service, where an individual who's not a hacker and who's not a cyber expert per se would be able to buy the ransomware and then be able to inflict it on an individual or an entity with the help of the service provider.
I think,
Um,
Shiraz, one thing we would be remiss in saying is anecdotally, 60% of small, medium businesses that are hacked close down because their clients and customers stop doing business with them. So it's one of those.
Plus, you get sued by everyone and you have no money left. So if there was a large scale incident about a year and a half ago where several organizations that are in the healthcare industry, like big ones, like large health insurance companies, and like Quest Diagnostic and LabCorp and a bunch of these guys, they were all using the same vendor. It was a debt collector, and the debt collector was compromised. And because the debt collector was compromised, all of these other entities got compromised. And that debt collector only bought $1 million of insurance for professional liability and cyber. And that limit was eroded instantaneously, and then the company was being sued by everyone for tens of millions of dollars and just folded.
And I mean, that exemplifies, if I give you, Shiraz, my information and you give my information to somebody else and that somebody else is hacked, I sue you because you're the one I gave the information to, even if you weren't the one from whom it was stolen.
Oh, absolutely. You can tell Rick, we can tell you countless number of people, even till this day, that will tell you, oh, I don't store the information. I have a third party do it for me. Yes, that's the vendor. Well, guess what? Do you think that vendor is protecting you in any way legally? Are they indemnifying you for anything in the event that they lose the information or the system gets compromised? I don't know. Did you call somebody like Rick to negotiate the contract? Because if you didn't, then it's probably not.
That's one thing. And I can't, you're right. I can't stress enough, vendor contracts are, other than securing yourself, securing your vendors and securing your vendor contracts is, to me, number two or 1A, because there's the old adage, you're only as strong as your weakest link, and if your vendors are weak, then so too are you.
I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse on this slide, so why don't we just jump ahead to a couple others?
Yeah, these are just the people. I don't want to go through.
See, there's an example of it, the 6 categories versus 2. All right, so you want me to speak to this one too?
Yeah,
Rick?
yeah.
Sure. So actually, if you have what we refer to as a security failure or a privacy incident, essentially these two things are mutually intertwined or also mutually exclusive. A security failure is going to be the failure of your organization to protect the computer system. The privacy incident would be the failure of the organization to protect private information. If one of both of those things happen, this is typically what and cyber insurance policy will pay for: response costs, legal advice, public relations, and then if you get sued, legal defense and settlements for the class actions and stuff. You want to just skip to the next slide? What we're starting to see in the future now is it's beyond just private information. It's now moving into the world of the Internet of Things. So we're talking about possible physical damage occurring from cyber incidents. There's only been a handful that been reported, but we believe going into the future, this is going to be a much bigger concern for the insurance industry and just for the risk in general. And it opens up the pool of who needs the insurance, because traditionally it would be like, oh, we deal in private information, meaning we're a retailer, we're in hospitality, we're in healthcare, so we're the ones that need to buy cyber, when in reality, it's more now impacting manufacturing, transportation, home appliances and commercial appliances and these types of things. So if you want to skip to the next slide, or Kristen, I'm sorry. So ultimately what we have to start to think about is, when does a computer virus affect somebody's organization or computer system that leads to physical injury versus a product that you're selling, right? So it's the customer's computer system that's ultimately impacted. So what does that mean? So let's say I'm in the office right now. It's owned by Brookfield Properties. When I came up here, there was a smart elevator. Somebody hacks into the smart elevator, causes it to collapse. 2 people die. There's $5 million worth of property damage to the lobby and the elevator shaft. And then we also have 2 people dead. Who's going to respond? Think it's first thing people are going to know is somebody got hacked? Probably not. What's going to happen is, if you want to just skip to the next slide.
One example, Shiraz, is, let's say you have, as you said, Internet of Things. So you control, let's say, your heat, let's say something, and your phone or your whatever screws up and sends a bad message to the receiving device. It starts a fire, and your house burns down. And it all evolved out of the Internet of Things. Now, if your house burns down, you may have homeowners insurance, maybe not, depending on what the policy exclusions look like, but it's a cyber incident that creates physical damage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So why don't we just keep moving on to the next topic?
Yep.
Just cognizant of time.
Keep going. Next. These are examples of how people get into systems, or how people wind up transferring funds to a fraudster. I had one where somebody in accounting got an email saying, send a $25 million wire to this address. Then 2 days later gets another email saying, check that, send the money to this address. The person did not do their due diligence, didn't check whether the sender was the real person, didn't check with management for authority, just wired $25 million to a bank account in Texas that then found its way to Mexico, that found its way to the Cayman Islands, that found its way to North Korea. And they were out $25 million uninsured. So these are just examples of how things like that work. Next, go to the next 5. And we talked about, these are examples of how the threat actors get in. What they try to do as a vector is the term of art, to get into your network, or to steal money, have you wire money to the wrong place, be it to a client, a customer, a vendor, etc. Next. 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 So here are some questions that you should look at in the context of your own business, because
Actually, Rick, you want to go back a slide? This is sort of where we get into how we underwrite the account.
Oh, sure. How much, Deb, how much time do we have?
The program goes to 1:30, so you really do have enough time. I don't have any questions so far in the chat, so we're doing really well.
Can we go back one more?
Yeah, Kristen will have to go back a slide.
Okay, no, all right, let's just go forward to the computer system. Okay, so when we underwrite your account, or we're trying to determine how to analyze or view your computer system and the amount of private information you have, that's really what drives the pricing and everything like that. These are sort of the questions that we would be looking at. Well, number one, we want to understand your system's topography. So ultimately, it's like an org chart for the computer. It starts with, do you operate the network yourself, or do you outsource to a vendor? And this doesn't have to be a black and white answer. This is could be a fluid answer, where part of it is done by you, part of it is done by a vendor. There is no right or wrong answer. It's a question that you need to ask yourself and sort of determine what percentage of your network or your systems are run by you, and how much of it is outsourced. 50, 50, 60, 40, 70, 30, so on and so forth. The second thing I would say is once we determine how much we're operating ourselves versus through a vendor, then we need to take an inventory of our servers, laptops, desktops, mobile devices, etc., and get a physical inventory of the number of they're called endpoints, the number of endpoints that we have. All right. And then in addition to that, we also need to identify all critical platforms and applications and their interconnectivity with your business. All right. A big part of the cyber insurance coverage is business interruption caused by a security failure. So you need to look at the impact, not only financially, but also operationally, productivity wise, that your business would have in the event that certain platforms, applications, or systems were not available. All right. In addition to that, we need to understand that this computer system is now the main storage facility of private information. And as we've seen in the previous presentations and ours, what defines private information is pretty complicated but basic. If there are pieces of information that can identify you as an individual uniquely, we have private information. And where that's stored and how it's protected and how we move it is very important. So most of the laws that Rick and the others were talking about revolve around protecting the private information, both on the collection side and from the fear of losing it. And one of the main things that you can do to help minimize the risk of losing private information is on here below, where we talk about the security and governance, encryption. Encryption, for those that are on the call, whatever, that are not familiar with it, is a way to make something readable unreadable. So everything you see here that allows you to read our slide is binary code in the computer system, which is a series of zeros and ones in a particular order that allows you to see it the way that it is. If we take a step back and we scramble those zeros and ones, this no longer becomes readable and it becomes gibberish. So we want to, well, and then if you want to turn it back to the readable state, you'd need a key or a token to decrypt it and bring it back to its original state. So a lot of the laws revolve around whether or not the private information was or was not encrypted. And if it was encrypted, you technically might not have violated the law, but if it's not encrypted, then you did. So to us, when you're storing and moving the private information, whether or not it's encrypted is very important. In addition to that control feature, we look at a bunch of these other topics as well. A WISP is a written information security policy, a privacy policy, firewall, antivirus. MFA, this is a very big hot button topic right now within the insurance industry. It's referred to as multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is basically adding a padlock to your door. Every platform or application that you use that requires a user interface with login credentials is a gateway or a doorway into your building. The building would be the network, and inside the building is valuable or sensitive data. Okay, so every door that we have that has a username and password basically has a lock on the door, which I would consider regular door lock with the key. And with persistent and brute force attacks, that can be taken down. The MFA, or the dual factor or two-factor authentication, now adds another layer of defense, which I would call the padlock, that goes on the door by having a push go to your phone, to email, or somewhere else, where that bad actor would have to have access to both items in order to get past this door. It is a huge security feature that is being taken advantage of if you don't have it. And the statistics show it. So if you look at all the hundreds of millions of dollars insurance carriers have paid over the past couple of years on ransomwares, 95% of the policyholders that we paid on behalf of were not using multi-factor authentication. We're not using it.
And I will tell you, I draft cyber insurance policies, and so I know them pretty well. And we've now come to the point, and Shiraz, you can ratify this, that if you don't have multi-factor authentication, the odds of you being able to get insurance, cyber insurance, are greatly diminished. That is one of the questions on the questionnaire.
It's an auto decline right now.
Yeah, it's an auto decline. That's exactly right. So, this stuff you can't ignore and pretend that it's not going to happen to you. It will happen to you. And if you don't have insurance, and we really haven't talked about why you should buy insurance. An example is, do you have homeowners insurance? Yes. If your house burns down, what happens? I move to another place. Okay, do you have cyber insurance? No. If your business burns down from a cyber event, what happens? You go out of business. So I would rather insure my business than my house, which is effectively a widget. My business is irreplaceable or virtually irreplaceable. My home is eminently replaceable. So cyber insurance, to me, as much as a very good privacy regime in place, is extremely, extremely important from an IT and a human factors training standpoint. Having the backup of insurance is almost every bit as important. And since I'm not the underwriter, Shiraz is, that wasn't an advertisement.
Well, thank you. Well, I think what you guys are seeing is a common thread from what Micah was saying, what Eric was saying. We're all saying the same thing pretty much about how to sort of protect yourself and what are the best practices. What I'm telling you is, though, from my perspective, is these are questions that will be asked of you. And if you answer no, basically these, what I'm showing you right here, if you answer no to any of these, it's an auto decline. These are the minimum things you have to have.
Excuse me, Shiraz, I have a quick question. So if you're a small business, how would you even develop any of these security and governance policies? You'd have to hire a IT person or company?
So
And
security is done by cybersecurity and IT, and governance is done by Rick and lawyers. So it's a combination of both. Because I mean, Micah, you could speak because you're sort of on the IT side. You guys aren't going to write a privacy policy or written information security policy for a client, right? That's something you would get Rick to do, while Micah and them would help you implement the firewall, get you the right antivirus, help implement the MFA. They're called a managed security services provider or a managed services provider, where basically they do everything for you soup to nuts.
Oh, very important. So really that is like the first step, it sounds like.
Yeah, because not everybody can hire, 5 people to do all of this stuff, right? Those people are going to cost you a ton of money. So these managed service providers will give you a subscription contract that's basically going to include a whole bunch of stuff for X dollars a month. And that's going to get you, to get all of this stuff, it's not cheap. I'm going to be honest, it's not cheap. And that's why we see that small businesses, especially micro businesses, struggle because they're not technically like a big corporation, but yet they're not a personal computer. So they're stuck in this in between. But I can tell you there is quite a number of companies that have emerged that can help you with pieces of these things, right? And so you have to sort of find the right partner to help you with this. So,
and Shiraz, a couple points that I want to make on that. When you're going to hire a vendor, whether it be an MSS or someone, you want to make sure that their systems are as secure as your systems. So you want to put that in a contract. 2, you want them to indemnify you if they lose the information or your information, have it stolen or are a vector into a hack into your system. And 3, you want to make sure they have cyber insurance to back them
And
up.
errors and omissions for technology.
And
All right.
technology, right? If they're a technology company, errors and omissions, which is malpractice.
My
Effectively
suggestion is
malpractice.
you ask them point blank, hey, if your company gets a ransomware and my customers are impacted, what are you going to do?
Who's going to pay?
Who's going to pay?
I do have one thing, and I'm sorry to cut you both off there. There have been many attacks as well on some of the software that MSPs use.
Correct.
I'll leave it up to Shiraz to speak to those, but that's another thing you want to be aware of. Some of this software makes MSPs' lives a lot easier, but in the event that software is attacked, it makes everyone's life that's involved significantly harder. Sorry to cut
Well,
you
this is another huge part of identifying the exposure from a carrier's perspective. Aggregation of exposure. Just think about how many of our customers are using Microsoft Office. Okay, how many of them? Amazon controls the cloud market. They control over 65% of it. That means 65% of the insurable pool is on Amazon Web Services, right? So what Mike is mentioning is in the past 3 or 4 months, 2 different softwares that are used to manage multiple platforms were compromised. And what did they do? So basically, when you go to do your normal software update, which you're supposed to do, you're actually uploading the virus.
And Shiraz, it gets as granular as an iPhone because Apple released a patch in an emergency notification the other day that there is a vulnerability in the iPhone, and you darn well better download the update, because if you don't, you are tremendously at risk, and people aren't doing that. So if they store, as we talked about before, in their phone all of their passwords, you could save the passwords for auto entry. All of that is at risk if your bank account, if your investment account, I think John mentioned his 401k or whatever, things like that. If you have the passwords in your phone and you haven't updated and you have the vulnerability and you lose your money.
Absolutely. So if you want to just jump.
Excuse me 1 second, just to go then, assuming you've hired someone and you've done the areas and omissions and you've done all this other due diligence. So for a small company, how expensive is an insurance policy? I mean, we're talking $100,000 a year, or?
I would say
Just
it
a
depends
magnitude.
on 4 factors. 4
Okay.
major factors. One would
Okay.
be your class of business, which we break that down. Well, every carrier looks at it a bit differently, but the way that I look at it and the way Arch is going to look at it is there's business to business. So that would be a manufacturer, that'd be a transportation and logistics company, that would be a construction company, that would be an A&E firm, an architects and engineering firm, something like that, right? Where they don't really handle a lot of private information. The second group would be a direct to consumer. So that's a retailer, hospitality, hospital, non-for-profit, the school or university, so on and so forth, where you're dealing direct to consumer. The third bucket is the one I was just speaking of, which is business to business that exchanges in private information or the computer system. The first group that I described to you is what we would call a hazard class 1, the lowest hazard. The third group would be the highest hazard. Okay, once we determine your hazard class, then why is the one more dangerous than the other? If you get a ransom incident on the manufacturer, we're going to pay for Rick, the law firm. We're going to pay for a cybersecurity firm to come in and investigate and figure out what happened. We're going to pay for a public relations firm to do a press release and to do some brand reputational harm mitigation. If information's compromised, we're going to pay for notification costs and identity monitoring. But in the case of that business to business, it's probably just their employees because they don't have any other private information. So it's a minimal or most likely not going to happen based on our experience. Then from there, you're going to have to recover, restore, and recreate the computer system. And we're going to have to pay for any income loss, continuing normal operating expenses, or extra expenses that are incurred because of the incident. And if you want to pay or decide to pay the actual demand of $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $5 million, whatever it may be, that would also be contemplated. So you're looking at 5 or 6 things that have to be insured. When we get into direct to consumer, we have those 5 or 6 things, plus we have to notify and we have to provide identity or credit monitoring, and we're going to most likely get sued, and we're most likely going to have a regulatory proceeding made against us as well. So now we went from 5 or 6 to 8, 9 things that we have to cover. All right. When you're the business to business with the exchange, we have to cover all those 8, 9 things plus the errors and omissions, because it's your professional service or your duty or your responsibility to your customers to protect the information or protect the computer system. So that now we've hit 10 different insuring agreements, right? So it's really about the downstream loss rather than your likelihood of getting hacked.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wrote a policy with 14 insuring agreements. Some of them are now obsolete. For example, Shiraz, there used to be contingent dependent business interruption. So
We
if
still
you,
have that.
some companies don't. Some companies have stopped writing that.
So
And
do you want to we can just quickly explain to the audience what that means. What that means is we rely upon Microsoft or Amazon Web Services, and they suffer the security failure, which subsequently means our business is interrupted, even though our company wasn't actually hacked. All right.
yeah, I would say you are progressive or forward looking in that space because some of your competitors are just no longer doing that. So my point is
Well, the
that,
competitors are looking at something which is not driving the losses. The loss
well,
is being driven by regular run-of-the-mill cyber coverage, which were the first 5 or 6 things I described to you, 8 things. There's no endorsement, there's no enhancement, there's no special thing about it. It is straight what it's designed for. The problem is the frequency and severity has skyrocketed to the point where people cannot sustain it anymore. And what we were doing, and I'm guilty of this too 5, 6 years ago, is this: if we did this panel 5, 6 years ago, me and Rick would be trying to convince you to buy the policy. Now we're like, you can't even get access to it unless you do these things. There's been a fundamental shift in the view of the need for this product. It used to be what we would call ancillary. And trust me, I would go door to door like a used car, a knife salesperson going knock, knock, knock. Hey, you guys should buy cyber insurance. And they'd be like, oh, nobody wants to hack me, whatever. But now, like Rick mentioned and others mentioned, it's front page news. It's the #1 threat, existential threat facing American businesses right now, globally, and especially in America. So we're not here to try to convince you the need to buy the insurance policy. The question is, if you're not buying it, you're self-insured, and is that where you want to be based on answering these questions in your mind about the controls?
and again, to put a fine point on it, if you do not have the controls in place, you're not going to get cyber insurance at all. And if you do have the controls in place, it also matters, and I hate to say it, who your insurance broker is, because Shiraz, you could speak to this better than I can, but if the underwriters are being deluged with applications for cyber insurance, it's incredible the number of applications coming in this year that rather than past years, to the point where underwriters don't have time to look at all of submissions. So they're looking at submissions from brokers they know and putting to the side submissions from brokers they don't know who have never written through them.
He's absolutely
So,
right. But
so
what I'd like to say, Deb, just to answer your question in its entirety, how much would it cost? Okay. If we look at these things, the loss history, the controls, the class of business, and then there's the revenue. Revenue drives a lot of this. And what I can tell you is if you're less than 25 million in revenues, you shouldn't be paying more than $5,000 a year for a 1 mil policy. Maybe if you are a medical records company or something that's dangerous, then yes, you'll probably be paying closer to 10 or maybe 25,000 for that $1 million limit. But a small, like if you were a small manufacturer that does 15 million in sales, you're probably going to pay between $5,000 and $10,000 for a $1 million limit. And your deductible will probably be around $25,000, maybe
Wow.
10,
So
depending
let's
on your
say you're
controls.
let's say you're a large company with over 400 employees at a 60 to 100 million dollar sales. That's not so, it's just small company.
If let's say, and you're the manufacturer or
Yeah,
transportation and logistics, you're
you're the
looking at
manufacturer.
approximately $20,000 to $25,000 per million that you buy.
Wow.
If you're the like let's say you create software for online gambling or you create software for electronic medical records, you're looking at closer to $40,000 to $50,000 per million that you're buying.
Well, I'm thinking of
If
a
you bought a
very
$5
pure
million policy, you're
manufacturer.
looking at 250,000 of. Sure, go ahead. I'm sorry, Deb.
I was thinking of a very pure, like a corrugated box manufacturer. Now, that
Yeah, so we
sounds
have
kind of
a
simple, but all of that machinery is really sophisticated and probably all
absolutely.
right? And
I have a
interconnected.
corrugated box manufacturer that had a $70 million cyber loss from a ransomware. Granted, they do over 10 billion in revenues in
Oh,
corrugated
wow.
boxes, but you could just
Wow.
do it in scale, right? So let's say our customer was, instead of a billion or 10 billion, they're 100 million. So that diminished it by like, 100 times. So that 70 million is still 7 million. Even if it was 700,000, do you have extra 700,000 on the balance sheet? That's when the insurance policy becomes a lottery ticket.
That's the truth.
Because I've seen it. I've seen like we had one at my previous carrier. It's based in New Jersey. It's a hotel resort that has 3 locations in a very nice beach town. Okay, they suffered the ransom, but in the middle of the ransom, they were planning to change the point of sale system. So now they got a brand new point of sale system for free. Basically, the one they were using was discontinued and didn't even work anymore. You couldn't even you had to replace it with like, consider it like an Apple iPhone 5
No, that's
is what we had.
Shiraz,
So
that's exactly what I'm doing right now with a hotel managed service company that runs 46 hotels, and their email server was breached. And so we've had to reconstruct everything. They took down everything from the servers to the network to the everything and rebuilt everything from the ground up. And it's cost a pretty penny. And they're paying, I think I did the calculation, 40 times more than they would have paid me if they had hired me before the event.
well, we only have 2 minutes left, and I saw there's a question in the private chat. It says, has there been any issues you've run into with some of the new laws regarding paying ransoms that may support terrorist organizations?
Okay.
Yeah, so there's OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Control, where it has become quite an issue for insurance carriers and lawyers because they aren't always seeing eye to eye on whether there is an OFAC alert on. So basically, when we pay these hackers, we're paying them through what's referred to as a wallet. A wallet is a fancy term for a bank account for digital assets. A digital asset would be cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, etc. Okay, so there's now some ability by individuals and groups to track back the wallet and connect it back to somebody on the OFAC sanctions list. All right. If that's the case, the carrier is not going to pay the demand at all. If you choose to pay it, that's your choice. Outside of that, it's really about who the insurance carrier is and how they wrote the policy. Most carriers are going to say that you must get the carrier's written consent or consent of some sort prior to making the payment, but ultimately they're reimbursing you. They're not going to lay out the money. Okay.
And-
And they're going to tell you, you need to establish some sort of reasonableness standard to pay. Meaning what? Meaning we think that if the hackers have everything and they say, we'll give you the key, and the cybersecurity firm says, with the key, we can get you back up and running in 5 to 7 business days. But if we don't get the key, it's going to take 5 to 7 weeks. And then the question becomes, all right, what are we going to benefit by being down 5 to 7 weeks versus 5 to 7 days? How much money are we actually going to lose? Are we going to lose more than the amount that we're going to pay in the demand? Right? Same with the cost to recover. These are what's going to decide whether or not, you're going to get sued no matter what if they have the private information. So anybody who tells you, oh, we should pay the demand because the hackers promised they wouldn't post the stuff on the internet and they promised to destroy the data, well, you're negotiating with the criminal. Rick will tell you he doesn't even trust a lawyer that's passed the bar, let alone a criminal. Right?
I don't trust underwriters either. So that's
so how we're negotiating, basically when a hacker does this to you, it's like they robbed you in the street, took your wallet, and then said, you want your wallet, your ID, your credit card, and everything back? Pay me $10,000. And you'd be like, I don't even have $10,000 in my wallet, but your credit card has a $10,000 limit and I'm going to use it. No, you're not. I already shut it down.
yeah.
Go ahead. Flip them the bird. It's useless.
And
That's why we would tell you, encrypt the data yourself. Back it up. If they think they have it, they lost it, whatever, and you can get it back, you too can flip them the bird.
And here's 2 points. Yesterday, the Department of the Treasury talked about ransomware and ransom payments, and they fine you if they find out you made a ransomware payment. If you self-report, they said yesterday, and tell the government that you did it, they will be more lenient on you. They also went down and shut down a cryptocurrency exchange yesterday. But the more important point I want to make is Shiraz was talking about backups. You don't want your backup connected to your network, because if they get into your network and they corrupt everything, they corrupted your backup. It was connected to the network. So if you're going to have backup, it's got to be on a totally different network infrastructure, or you'll never be able to use it to restore.
Needs to be outsourced to 2 separate companies. So you send one backup to one company and you send one backup to another company. That's the best way to do it.
And that'll save you. I will tell you, and Shiraz, you push back, the cost of data restoration is the highest. It's more than IT forensics. It's more than lawyers, and we're pretty cheap, to be honest with you. At least
data restoration was drives the cost. But what I think is the biggest and most complete waste of money is to pay the criminal. Why on earth are we paying this person $1 million, $2 million, $3 million? For what? Oh, so they'll unlock your system. Well, that's great. I can pay somebody to unlock my system and then get other things from them as well, and I don't have to waste my limit on paying a criminal. Anyway, go ahead, Deb.
The problem, Shiraz, is if you don't pay them, they threaten to publish the data on the dark web. And even if you do pay them, they may publish it.
Go ahead. What's the repercussion financially? I have to notify the individual and they're going to sue me. Then we're going to go to court and they're going to, the plaintiff's counsel is going to say, you could have paid the criminals and stop this. You didn't do enough. And then I would have just turned around as defense counsel was like, I was the victim of a crime. Along with these people, we were all victims of a crime.
So Shiraz,
you know what I mean?
Your bottom line advice is really to have your security and governance really solid. In other words, when you say store your data, you can have an external hard drive and whatever. Every Friday, you back it up on your external hard drive and you unplug it from your system, and put it in a safe or whatever, rotate those things. I had one company, and it wasn't related to cyber, but they literally were making parts for nuclear power plants, and there was a flood, and they were all hanging from clothespins on a clothesline because they were all wet. And I said, "You've never heard of the web? You've never heard of, putting these on electronically saving them or something?" So they didn't even get them to a bank vault. So I mean, I think there were you can hire some people to really advise you how to take the right precautions and work for something. Because I'm thinking of the little guy, maybe they have 20 employees if they're lucky, 10 employees. Some of this stuff is really expensive and maybe beyond them, but I think that some of your security ideas, the storage and looking at your system topography, that really, I think, would apply to everyone, don't you think?
Yeah, I think what you're gonna. Well, I'll leave you with this last comment. Based on my experience with handling the claims and litigators and regulations and those types of things, you have to do whatever you can within the resources that you have. So they're not going to look at a small company the same way they look at a big company.
Right.
So if you did the best that you could and said, listen, I found as many things I could, I listened to this presentation, I took notes, I took action. So when you get stuck in that courtroom, God forbid, you're going to say, I did everything within my power to stop this from happening, and it still happened. You're not negligent then. Rick, do you disagree?
No, I think you're entirely right. I think you are 100% correct.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. This was really rousing. I thought it was very exciting. I want to thank all of our presenters today. Micah Hassinger from A-Time Consulting, Eric Rosenberg from Chief Information Officer for William Pass University, and of course, Rick Bortnick and Shiraz Saeed. Shiraz, of course, is with Arch Insurance, and Rick is with Wilson Elsner. I cannot pick up the chat, so I don't know, Shiraz, you were able to do that. Do you see any other questions on the chat?
Nope, it was just the one regarding the
Just that
ransom
one?
payments.
Okay, terrific. So I want to thank everyone for their participation today. Fabulous panelists. I think we should do this again. And we have recorded this, and we will be emailing out the slides to all of our guests today, as well as a link to the recording if they'd like to review it again. Because I think you have a lot of information. You shared a lot of information, a lot of good concepts, and it's not for the faint of heart. It's really quite a complicated topic. Kate, I don't know if she's still on. I don't know if she wanted to say anything at the end. I don't see her. Okay. So thank you all very, very much. Enjoy your first day of fall. And I appreciate you so much for participating today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Deborah.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Sam.
Bye.
Bye.